Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Cox, and I'm the Community Economic Development Specialist here in the College of Trop Ag and Human Resources. I do a lot of work with entrepreneurship, so I'm going to share with you a little lecture that I've developed so you can help you understand this topic. So here we go. Share. Okay, so we're going to learn how entrepreneurship works, what it looks like, and so that you can actually learn how to be a better entrepreneur yourself. First of all, we have communities out there facing a lot of challenges. The communities use their resources to maintain or increase their well-being. This is their ultimate goal, and I think all of us would agree that we would like our communities to do better. It's very important to people in NREM. Change definitely affects people's well-being. After all, the only person that really likes change is a wet baby. So we have to remember this when we're looking to the future as this change is going on. How do we keep everybody's well-being up? We see a lot of negative statistics about homeless and problems around the world. So we really need to do some thinking about this. The pace of change is increasing. This is creating huge challenges. Global climate change is coming down faster and faster and faster. This is going to make us, first of all, more and more nervous about the future, and secondly, give us more and more challenges. The damage from some of these global climate change problems like floods, too much water, not enough water, extremely challenging for people around the world. So we will need to worry about that. We need to manage all the risks associated with change. And we see today that entrepreneurship has clearly been recognized as something that's very important in managing change. We see colleges throughout the nation offering entrepreneurship programs. Well, most of them are actually in business schools, and they tend to focus on these large growth models where the firm starts out small and we're accelerating growth and we're in accelerators and leveraging and all these fancy words. That's fine. But for me as a community economic development specialist, I don't see entrepreneurship as only being business. It clearly isn't. It's clearly not a single all or nothing trait. It comes in a lot of different shapes, sizes, and amounts. It's very important that we learn about it and learn to equip ourselves with more entrepreneurial ability so that we can be there to help our communities in the future. You are the future, and we're looking to you to make sure that our communities are not swallowed up by the negative change in the future. So exactly how do the entrepreneurs act? Well, they see opportunities. I'm kind of famous for this because I'm a born and bred entrepreneur. I look around and I don't see things like a lot of other people. I always see possibilities, particularly because I'm in real estate. I have a real estate management development firm. I just see this. I just see how things could be changed. I'm always looking at that. I try to challenge myself by taking risks and changing everything. At the beginning of the year, I will make a list for myself of what I'm going to try and change that year. And every year I try to challenge myself with some new changes so that I can more able to take advantage of opportunities and really see things. That's something that's very important to me, and it's very important to entrepreneurs. It's kind of how they're wired. The next thing they do is really figure out how to acquire those resources, because an opportunity generally would require resources so that you can turn that into increased well-being or wealth. Then I get my to-do list out. All entrepreneurs get out their to-do list and they start working to turn the opportunity into more and more increased wealth. They want it to grow exponentially, and that's really something that you hear in these seminars, these get rich quicker seminars. This is what they're really accelerating. And this wealth may be cultural, social, environmental, or economic. I think it's all of those are possible. And I think at NREM, when we're interested in sustainability, we know that the social, environmental, and economic has to grow together, or we're going to be in big trouble. So we really need you all to really think in these very, very merged terms. So it's not just business, because that's not what entrepreneurship is about. If we were talking profits, we would talk profits. We're talking entrepreneurship, increasing wealth of any way, shape, or form. So this is very important. So let's talk about the types of entrepreneurs. You've taken your entrepreneurship estimator activities and you have a rating for yourself. So let's kind of talk about this, and we'll link it to those activities that you did. Achievers, we all know those achievers. They are so dedicated to their personal goals, and they have those to-do lists, and they work really hard. And generally they achieve a lot of things. So that's great. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you really probably need to have some achiever genes and somebody that's involved in the group. The downside to this is sometimes they're a little bit too reluctant to admit that maybe they can't do it all, or they're too optimistic. Again, achievers are very optimistic, and you need to be optimistic to be a good entrepreneur, but at the same time, you also need to be a realist. What's another word for realist? Pessimist, you said? I think so. Realists are often pessimistic because stuff happens. We need to be prepared for that. So achievers who think that they can just come in and solve every problem, that just doesn't work. So we really need to guard against the downside of that personality type. Then there's salespeople. Oh my gosh, they care about so many people and they're so enthusiastic and positive. These are the people that can sell you the shirt off their back because they know that you need it, and they can communicate that to you and you will be convinced. This is such a valuable skill because some of us are very hard to convince to change. So this is a valuable group to us. Sometimes, however, they get blinded by their belief that this good or service is going to solve all problems when it doesn't. So then we have people that believe the salespeople, and they end up in a bad position because they had blind faith and the salesperson had blind faith, and that may get us into some trouble. So again, we cannot be optimistic all the time about certain potential downsides called risk. We need to understand that and be willing to not do things that are just too dangerous to do because we're going to lose things we cannot afford to lose. This is very, very important. Drug dealers, great salespeople, very entrepreneurial, but have a problem assessing risk. They're taking too big a risk. They're going to lose something they really can't afford to lose. So you really need to watch out for that one. Then we have managers. They're competitive and decisive. They like being in charge. They love to delegate. Oh, everybody's doing everything. They're always right there doing that. That's great. However, at the end of the day, they look at their success, that they were able to achieve something, and they go home thinking that was a win. That's not a win. What is a win for an entrepreneur? When that wealth is increased. The manager is not looking at that. The manager is looking at how well things got done. Did they beat the other person? That's not what an entrepreneur is looking at. An entrepreneur is driven to do something because they feel that it's an opportunity that can produce wealth. It drives them. They are not driven by beating the other person. So that's the downside of the manager personality. So we really need to be careful about that. Lastly, there's inventors. This personality is very interesting because they love new ideas. So they're always running at the front of the pack with new ideas. That can also be very dangerous, frankly. The reasons why that's dangerous is because they think they're always right, and they will have a tendency not to see the risks associated with their new idea. They think they're have skills that other people don't have that will ensure that their success, and they will be able to invent themselves out of problems. Doesn't always work that way. You still need to be able to assess the risk with the new invention, because you may think it's great, but as social diffusion theory tells us, not all ideas are perceived by everybody as great. So you may talk and talk and talk, but if everybody else isn't convinced that this is really an opportunity to increase wealth, you're going to run into some problems. You can't do it all by yourself, but the inventor really has great confidence in their mind because it's so creative. So you need to be careful about that. Again, now what we're looking for is all 4 types. Unfortunately, most of us will tend to like people like ourselves. So you'll often get a group of people that's the same type. Not what you want. I know it's comfortable. But sometimes a little tension produces a better product. So if you look for people that are different than you and learn how to get along with them and communicate with them, you'll really do much, much better in taking advantage of that opportunity. Most people may see themselves as having more than one type. And if you have more than one type, well, maybe not most people, but some of us think we have more than one type. That's a way to be more successful because you're able to try and be different, take different approaches. Generally, achievers and managers are the most common combination. Inventors are usually a different kind of left brain, right brain setup than achievers and managers. So it's rare that you see that combination together, although I have seen it. I think my son and I have very much left brain, right brain connection because some days he's very, very technical. He's a software developer. I'm very good at math. I can be very, very technical. But on the other side, I can be very creative and so can he. In fact, sometimes he's almost silly creative. So he's even more pronounced than me in the spectrums that he can go across. But it's rare that you generally find the left brain, right brain able to switch back and forth as easily. Usually one side dominates. So either you're very rational like the manager and the achiever, or you need to be very creative like the salesperson or the inventor. So it kind of just depends. And there's nothing that's bad if you're only one type. It's just a little more challenging because you got to find someone complementary to you. And again, you have to understand the limitations of each type because otherwise you may get overconfident, and this is often what causes problems. We see so many businesses going down today, like Sears, who's been around forever and ever. Apparently they weren't on top of things. We need to be nimble as times change. So you need to have people that are able to gear up for those changes. And now let's just debrief your little estimator. So the first thing on your estimator was the basketball toss. We have 2 kind of spectrums of personality types, or ends of the spectrum, I guess you would call it. The teenage girl, not to offend anyone, but teenage girls tend to be a little bit lacking in self-esteem, afraid to try risks, and probably not feeling very confident about their basketball skills. So they will often stand right next to the basket because they want to make all 3 baskets. For some reason, they don't want to fail. And I think that kind of shows that you may have a self-esteem problem, that you never want to try anything new because you might fail. So if you're in that boat, you need to try taking some risks where you might fail in a failure that doesn't really matter. So what happens if that doesn't work out? Will you worry about that next week? If you won't, then I guess you're not risking much and you should give it a shot. And you will up your risk-taking ability because you'll learn how to keep yourself more confident and get through that. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the teenage boys who set themselves up for failure by standing so far away from the basket that they know they're never going to make it, but everybody's oohing and awing at their attempt. And I have very rarely, though, seen them make those long, long shots. And everybody's cheering. So when you set yourself up like that and you accidentally score, then it's great. But in general, you'll see some people in life will set themselves up. They'll always be planning to do something they never try. They'll talk about stuff that never happens. I mean, they're just constantly dreaming, but they never take they never take step 1 towards getting towards the dream. You need to be able to say, this is where I want to go, and I'm going to take step towards it, or I'm going to simply let that go, and I'm going to move on to something more achievable. That's absolutely fine. Either way, you will have more success. So that's something that you need to think about, is how you address risk. Again, this is kind of my point about the drug dealer. Some people will be able to assess it well. Some people will not. But you never want to risk something you can't afford to lose. And the bankers will tell me often that this is the biggest problem, that people are too optimistic. They're unable to really assess risk. So you need to wear your realist hat when you're looking at how bad this could be, and be prepared, because it may get that bad. And if you can't handle it, don't risk it. Secondly, then we did some creativity games. Some of us are, again, more creative than others. I know that this frame game maybe was a little antiquated in some of the examples, which may make it difficult. Singing in the Rain, you may not even remember that song. However, you know if you're creative. You know if this is something that you're good at. Creativity, again, is very important because of that need for the inventor. So that was really the purpose of that. And you can teach yourself how to be more creative using visualization, meditation, relaxation. This is the purpose of all those things. Then there's this assessment of your personality. You must be able to understand what your good points are and what things you're weak at. Again, most of us will tend to move towards the people like us, and we won't admit that maybe we need something else. So this is a big problem. We really need to understand what we're good at and what we're not so good at and work on the not so good. If we're good at it, then I guess we don't need to work at it. So let's let that go. Let's move on to the stuff we really need to work on. Really pay some attention to that, because that'll probably be the cause for failure in most cases. Lastly was do you have an entrepreneur in your family? I am a quintessential entrepreneur. My grandmother was an entrepreneur. I'm sure that's where I got it. She started the family business as a bootlegger and in the Prohibition, and she made the family fortune. My uncles legitimized that by buying a Pepsi-Cola franchise, the first one purchased in the state of Montana. My mother ran that for them while they were at war, so she was very able to get through all these problems associated with the shortages brought up by war, and was able to make that business a success. So when they came home from the war, the family business was completely intact, and she went back to her role as a wife and a mother. And so definitely that entrepreneurship runs in my family. It's clear to me that I don't see things like other people see things sometimes. So definitely I can see how I was raised up like that. If you were raised like that, you probably will be modeling this behavior better. But if you're not raised like that, you can learn. And we're going to talk more about exactly what you're learning and exactly what you're looking for in the next few slides. So how do you recognize an opportunity? The first thing you need to visualize in your mind is how will it improve well-being in the future? One needs to be very, very clear. And it can't be just kind of, well, it should do it. You really need to be very concrete and be very clear on how that's going to work. For the nonprofits and the government organizations, there's something called the logic model, and it helps you actually articulate those long-term outcomes. Remember now, we are in NREM and we're all about sustainability. So we're very much into this long-term improvement thing. So it's going to take a lot of visioning and looking and futuring and looking forward to really get a handle on what this well-being is and how this is going to go. The next thing you need to think about is your role and what role are you going to play. Again, most of us will go to what we like to do, and that may not be what we should be doing. Maybe we should be doing something else. So you need to be very careful. What should you be doing? What could others do? And be really able to kind of see how that's going to go. It's a bit tricky. Really good entrepreneurs may not be doing some day-to-day things, even though they would like to and are fully capable of it. So this is what you need to guard against, that you don't get too swamped with things that are really not making change happen. So let's just look at an example of being an entrepreneur versus being an administrator. What do administrators do? First thing they do is they focus on what they have now and quick results. Again, we're talking about sustainability. A community runs on a 100-year time frame. Grandma, grandpa, mom and dad, the kids, maybe grandkids. That's a very long time frame, and we're not into quick results. The reason why we get into quick results is because none of us like to wait. This is our biggest problem. If we'd all wait, we would make better environmental decisions. We don't think about the downside because we're in such a hurry for that quick win. So this is a problem with administrators. Secondly, they decide slowly. That's not going to work either. You need to be very clear about where this is going. You need to have the vision set in your mind and clear about the roles, and you also need to be nimble enough to adjust on the fly. Sitting and doing nothing may be a solution sometimes if you don't have another alternative plan. But once you get that alternative plan, you need to move. Many of us are very frozen in making decisions, so that's a problem. Some of us also don't like to admit when we've made a mistake. This is a very common thing I see. It wasn't my fault, or we're arguing about whose fault it was. Who cares? Fix it. Change the decision. Come up with a new path. Let's get moving. Let's figure out how to fix this. Come on, let's go. Let's not waste time blaming. That is never a productive thing. You can't go back and change it. All you can do is look to the future and try and move forward. So figure out what's broken as fast as you can and fix it. Sometimes figuring out what's broken is something we don't do either because we don't want to admit we've made a bad decision. So we'll just kind of ignore it as if it's not happening. That doesn't work either. Also, administrators favor this clear, well-defined lines of authority and responsibility. Not my job. I'm in charge. I decide. You have to do the work. If you're expecting someone to do the work, you should probably involve them in the decision, and then they're much more able and capable of moving forward because they're not alienated. So these things are problems where we get wrapped up in our egos and not into taking advantage of the opportunity. So that's something that's a bit difficult, frankly, for some people. And they also concentrate on reducing risk. I never have talked about reducing risk when I talk about entrepreneurs. I talk about them recognizing the risk and understanding which risks are worth taking and which risks are not worth taking because the loss is just too big if it happens. So again, reducing risk, very time consuming. And a lot of people want to reduce with big projects. That's not really a good way to use resources. We need to use our resources to build wealth. We don't need to use our resources to deal with things that we can deal with as we go through. If a loss is too big to bear, then maybe that's a risk you maybe need to reduce eventually, but you're really better off concentrating on the good you can do rather than worrying about chronically eliminating the negative. You really need to focus on the positive in this case. And all you need to do is recognize which risks are not worth taking, move on to ones that are worth taking. It's a much better outcome if you want to be sustainable and entrepreneurial. So what kind of questions do entrepreneurs ask? Of course, where's the opportunity? How do I act on it? What resources do I need? How do I control these resources? What's the best way to organize? Again, it's this constant nimble approach to moving ahead. While administrators ask, what opportunity fits the resources that I control? That will never bring out the most wealth. Then how should I condition the opportunity? A lot of people I talk to, I'm just too out there for them. So that's kind of a problem because they're trying to limit the opportunity they're willing to consider. That's not how entrepreneurs and out-of-the-box thinkers look at things. They consider every possible option. Then they start worrying about, owning the resource, controlling the resource. How do I actually get that totally within my control by owning it or employing it? Maybe that's not what you do. Maybe you find someone else that has a resource and all you got to do is convince them to work with you. Much quicker and easier than trying to sit and fuss about how to control everything. And then lastly, again, is the ego thing comes in. And I don't want anybody to interfere with me being able to do whatever I want and then claim that I had a good performance. An entrepreneur is usually not worried about their own performance. What they're really worried about is how well this thing produced wealth. And they're trying to fix it so it does it better. They're not really worried about, I need to make sure it's how I wanted it to be. How did it turn out? Let's do better. That's really the question an entrepreneur is asking. And I'm sure you've experienced an administrator who asks the question differently. So lastly, let's just look at how you might educate yourself to become more entrepreneurial. Because after all, even if you're not a getting a high score on an entrepreneurial estimator and you're not the entrepreneur of the century, let's be clear that a good entrepreneur is still valued. Unfortunately, many of us may not like the traits of entrepreneurs because they can be seen as slightly pushy and a little bit off the beaten path. However, in general, given the change we're going to have to face, we really do need people that can help us get through these tough times. So the first trait you're looking for is achievement ability. You need to be able to problem solve, set goals, smart goals, simple, measurable, realistic. You know, you're going to evaluate them. You know what's an acceptable variance range and what isn't. You need to be able to make a decision. You can't be frozen where you can't make decisions. You also need to be able to manage your time and money. A lot of us get to the end of their week and think, wow, I wasted my week. Did you really waste your week? Why was that? Can't manage your money, can't keep track of things, can't control impulses. That's a problem. So you need to be able to control that because money will always be tight forever and ever when you're going after opportunities to increase wealth. So you've got to learn how to manage that. Secondly, nowadays, even nonprofits and government and non-governmental organizations are talking about having business plans. Okay, what does that look like? You got to learn what a business plan looks like. Who's that customer? What's the value proposition? What does a business plan look like? What are the parts? How do we deal with that? You got to be able to get through all that. And you have to learn how to manage all those moving parts. Also, economics. Why do we care about economics? I know a lot of my students didn't like it. What's good about it? Well, it helps us really analyze how people make decisions about resource use. We actually try to predict what they will do. This is very useful because being able to predict helps us reduce risk. We're able to say beforehand what we think they're going to do, and often this will actually turn out to be true. Even though we may not like economists, some of the things they suggest really do help us understand human behavior and be able to predict it. You also need to know how to work with individuals. Communication is the biggest problem I see in everything I do. Got to be able to communicate with people. Both got to be on the same page all the time or you're not going to really get anywhere. You have to be able to motivate people, which is difficult to do sometimes, I must say. You have to be able to engage in negotiation so that the other person and you both feel that you got what you wanted. It's very important and will ease a lot of tension and a lot of future discourse that may happen. You have to be able to mentor, how to help people be their best. You also need to be able to sell, convince people that it's a good idea, hit that unique selling point. That's what makes a successful business plan, is being able to articulate that unique selling point and capitalize on it. Be able to manage groups, team building. It's not just a bunch of people that show up and sit in the room together. You actually need to have a functioning team. You need to be able to facilitate discussions and activities. You need to be a leader. You need to be able to resolve conflict, and you need to learn how to govern yourself. Because again, for the entrepreneur, we have a constantly shifting organizational plan, possibly. So how are we going to get things done efficiently and effectively as a group? And that really requires some sort of governance plan. So this can be a little bit tricky if we have people that are resistant to being very nimble and changing what they do all the time. Some people like to do that and other people are more reluctant, so you'll have to work on that. Creativity, as I've discussed, is very important, and in general, it involves a lot of visualization, self-esteem, relaxing. That will all help you see things that maybe you didn't see before. And lastly, experience. If you've been around entrepreneurs, you can go seek them out. You can get different jobs where you can try and gain some skills, like a sales job. How do you do that? What works? What doesn't? Try that on for size. Meet some salespeople. Look at their personalities. Hang out with them. Do some role playing. It's all very, very useful. So I'm wishing you all the best here in NREM. And I trust that all of you have a spark of entrepreneurship. And I hope that this lecture and activities have helped you figure out how you might become more entrepreneurial in order to help us become more sustainable. Thank you.